What if you knew exactly how to build the business and life you want? Hey you, I'm Sarah Grace, host of the Victorious podcast and coach to victorious women like you, building life on her terms. You won't find the hustle or grind around here. We do things different. Yes, we are committed to our business and we are committed to family, faith, and fitness. What does that look like? A 12-hour work week. No more. Freedom Fridays? It's a must. Being present with those we love and bringing God into all areas of life. I'm showing you how to understand your unique business strategy and how to align that strategy with God. Stick around. I'll make sure you know exactly what to do next. Hey you, this is Sarah from the Victorious podcast and welcome back. Wow, we have got an episode in store for you today. I have been thinking about this specific interview for just about a month, and I just have not been able to get out of my mind the absolute importance that this is an episode you do not skip, you do not listen on double speed, you do not say, I will listen later. You decide now is the time that I am going to listen to this because we are talking about uncomfortable, challenging things today with one of my favorite humans on this entire earth. Let me introduce you to the amazing Cheryl Cardall. So glad you're here, Cheryl.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Sarah. It's so fun to chat with you.
This is so cool. So let me introduce you to Cheryl in the way that I know her. Okay. So I have known her for a couple of years back when I was podcasting about business years ago, before Victorious was ever born, before the Latter-day Ladypreneur podcast was ever born. I ran across Cheryl and everything about her was so invigorating. Like when I would be around Cheryl, she just knew that there was something within her that could absolutely change the world. And she was determined to find it. This is a woman who has gone through, when we've talked about the Victorious journey, she has gone through the spark, she has gone through the gate, she has gathered allies all around her. I consider myself one of her allies. And man, is she in a position right now to talk about one of the most prominent challenges of our day, mental health. Mental health.
Well, we're talking about mental health, but now I feel all this pressure, Sarah.
As you should.
How you introduced me, man. I think everyone needs Sarah as their hype person before they start talking, because that was awesome. So thank you for sharing that.
I actually consider us soul sisters with one really major reason. And that is the fact that my mission in life, and it's actually part of the role I have played in my own family growing up, is I was always the kid that would bring up the taboo subjects and that would talk about things that maybe are a little bit uncomfortable, but necessary to talk about, the elephant in the room. And I loved preparing for this podcast with you because you said something similar. You said, my job is to bring up subjects that are uncomfortable for people or unknown for people so that they don't feel alone. So I feel like we have this similar mission, right?
Yes. But I haven't always been this way. I don't really like conflict. Feeling uncomfortable, I haven't liked very much in my life. It's been the last few years of experiences with my own family that I've decided, hey, we need to talk about some of these uncomfortable things. We need to bring them up so that other people don't feel so alone.
Wow. And in the world of mental health, especially because you kind of target it specifically with teenagers. I mean, that's been the bulk of your experience there, that we also want to protect the teen. If we're posting things online or we're doing all these things, like I just have marveled at how you have navigated what I believe to be one of the trickiest topics with one of the trickiest age groups on your platform. So if you don't know Cheryl, I want to tell you right at the beginning, I want you to pause the podcast because I know that you're in Stitcher or you're in Apple Podcasts, you're in Spotify, or you're somewhere. I want you to pause the podcast and I want you to look for Fight Like a Mother. That is another podcast that you need to be listening to advocate for the mental health crisis that is happening in every single family in the world right now. And COVID didn't help this at all. So please I'm serious. I will even give you a couple of seconds to pause this podcast, go and subscribe to the podcast so that you can listen from Cheryl and really become an advocate in the world of mental health. Okay. All right. So Cheryl, my first question, we've got to come right out of the gate because we're not going to waste time. We're not going to mince words because we talk about things that are tough to talk about. Okay.
Right.
One of the things that I have been so fascinated with is your willingness to be so open in such a public space about things that are traditionally hidden or silently suffered. Maybe that's kind of the phrase I think of. And recently your son was hospitalized, and I'm going to let you open up. This is actually what made me say she has to get on the podcast now. And we shuffled guests and we said, she's got to come in sooner than anybody else. Okay. Can you tell us about that experience as much as you feel like you can share? And then I've got some questions to follow up.
Sure. So I have a teenage son who, and by the way, I just want to paraphrase or say beforehand, I have his permission to talk about this.
Yeah.
I would not come on a public forum or share in my podcast and Instagram if I did not have his permission. I think that's really important as parents, that we respect our kids' privacy. We ask for their permission, especially if we're sharing challenging things that they are living with. We can't just assume that because we're the parent, we can talk about it. It's their journey. And so I do have his permission to share. So I have a son with a lot of struggles with mental health. He has Tourette syndrome. He has several other diagnoses that follow under that umbrella of Tourette syndrome. And we have struggled together for several years. And adolescence has brought forth all new challenges with mental health, the hormones and kids are moody anyway, right? When they're teenagers. And then the hormones factor in. And when you already have the chemicals in your brain that aren't functioning correctly, that is a big, hold on, I'm going to start that over. When you have the hormones and when you have the chemicals in your brain, that can be a recipe for really big challenges. And so he has really struggled the last couple of years. And the end of March this year, he'd been struggling for several months, and we were trying to get him help and just couldn't quite pinpoint what the issues were. But he decided that it was too hard and that he'd had enough, and he attempted to take his life. And it was actually his second attempt. He had tried a year ago, January. And what that does to you as a parent is pretty indescribable unless you've experienced it. And so he was hospitalized for several days. And we actually had some really sweet and tender experiences during that hospital stay. So again, terrible, heart-wrenching experience. But we also were able to I felt like we had our boy back in that hospital room. That
really?
Yeah. I think that the experience was humbling to all of us. And his heart was really softened. And I had glimpses of my boy, who I know who truly is at his core. He was there. And we had some really tender spiritual experiences with him in the hospital room. Church is hard for him, and he hasn't gone for a while, but there was no doubt that in that room, our heavenly parents were there, and that he had angels watching over him, and he knew it. And he felt it, and we talked about it. So that's, just one of the experiences we've had in the last little while.
So let me ask you this as a follow-up. Something that you said was that church is hard for him.
Mm-hmm.
And many listeners here on this podcast are members of that faith.
Right.
And just lay it out for us. What are things about church that make it hard for him? And how can us as individual members of that church be better advocates for him specifically, that we can help in our ward or stakes or organizations? Or what's your advice there?
Well, he hasn't felt like he's fit in for a long time. He looks different than most of the boys at church. He's, he has pierced ears, he has longer hair. He has, he just doesn't fit the box. Sometimes we have this box at church that we feel like, or we have a perceived box, and maybe it's more of a perception. But he hasn't felt like he's fit in for a long time. And he's done some things that have kind of pushed him out of there. And in some ways, he doesn't want to be in the box. He doesn't want to be a part. And so, in some ways, he's alienated himself. But I think the only thing you can do for teenagers or anybody who either feels like they don't fit in, or maybe they've purposely separated themselves, all we can do is reach out and love them. Reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking about you, or we're doing this activity I thought you might really be interested in. We're going rock climbing. We thought you might be really interested in that. Would you be interested? Can I come pick you up for that? Or, it's the little things that we do to reach out. And that is for families of kids who are struggling too. Because sometimes you feel like when you have a child who's choosing not to participate, who's doing some things that are alienating them from church members, they look like they don't fit in, all of that, sometimes that can be difficult for the families. And so I think reaching out to the family and just saying, hey, we love you guys. We want you to come to this or that, or just stopping by and giving a hug or something like that. It's just those little ways to reach out that mean the most.
And what about you as a mother who has just been through what is truly my biggest nightmare, right? Because my oldest is 11. I know that we are on the brink of challenges that are just more serious than they were when they were 5,
Mm-hmm.
And so as a mother who's just gone through this, as a friend of yours, how can I be more supportive? How can I be a better advocate? Is it the phone calls? Is it the text? Is it things people say that you're like, please don't say that. Like, please don't say stuff like that. Or like, give us some guidance here on what your experience has been like.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing you can do for somebody has kids that are struggling is just listen.
Just listen.
Listen without judgment, without trying to silver lining their experience. At least he is alive. At least really avoid the phrase "at least."
Oh, that's brilliant.
Well, it could have been worse. Because it could have, but it was pretty bad how it was.
Oh, yeah.
And, Brene Brown has a fantastic video about empathy versus sympathy. And she talks about somebody who's in a deep, dark pit, right? And they're down there and they don't know how to get out. And she shows a video of people calling, come up, and the person who really makes a difference climbs down in their pit with them and just sits with them. And
that's what you need.
Doesn't try to make it better, because you can't fix it. I'll tell you an experience, and I've shared this with multiple people because it was just such the kindest, most thoughtful, small thing that somebody did for me. It was the week he attempted suicide, was the week before Easter. And a friend of mine didn't call, didn't ask, what can I do? She showed up with several bags full of Easter candy and sugar cereal. And she said, I thought maybe you hadn't thought about Easter with everything that's been going on. Oh my
gosh.
And so I brought you all the candy, and all my kids get a box of sugar cereal for Easter. So I thought maybe that would be helpful. I mean, how thoughtful is that she didn't need to say, and I'll tell you the phrase, let me know what I can do, or what do you need, as well-meaning as it may be, it's really hard for families in crisis to even know what we need.
So
So
just
maybe
make an assumption and act.
she just showed up, and then we sat and talked and hugged, and she listened, and she was there for probably 15 minutes. But that is the single most thing that was the most thoughtful thing to me in this situation. Maybe instead of saying, what can I do? Because I don't know what you can do. Like,
You don't even know as the person.
Well, and
yeah.
And Sarah, if you say, what can I do? I don't know, Sarah, can you bring me a meal? Can you come clean my house? I don't know what you're offering. So maybe offer specific things. Hey, Cheryl, I can bring you a meal on this day, or I could take your kids out for a fun adventure. Which would be most helpful? Or I can do both. Offer specific
I love this.
things that you can do so that the person not putting it on them to say, because it's really hard to ask for help, first of all. And second of all, when you're in that really hard position, sometimes you don't even know what you need. I wasn't hungry through all of this. And so meals, I didn't even think about that. And so when people did bring me meals, that was really helpful for us because I couldn't even think of what to fix my family because I wasn't hungry. So
well, and it's resonating so deeply with me that this is a lasting principle with any family in any sort of situation. Are they moving? Do they have a baby? Are they battling mental health? Like it's a known principle to say, what are ways that we can elevate our way to be effective at serving, right? How can we elevate? And what I love about the examples that you've shared, the sugar cereal and Easter candy just hits me to my core,
right.
Because what she's saying is, I recognize your brain is where it needs to be. And that you not thinking about Easter is probably the right thing because,
Right.
and I'm going to fill in that gap for you. It just acknowledges the mental trauma that is happening for a family with a new baby, with mental health, with whatever it may be, and says, I'm going to fill in that gap in a way that I know I have space for.
Exactly. Because I don't know what people have space for. And so I think offering those specific items or just dropping, I had people drop off flowers or, one of my friends just dropped by to give me a hug. And she's like, I didn't have anything to bring you. I didn't know what to bring. And I said, all I needed was you to show up. So sometimes it's just showing up.
I'm seen in this moment. I am being seen. I love that. Okay, Cheryl. Okay, the elephant in the room to me as a mother is something I've experienced with younger kids. Like I said, my oldest is 11, is when my kids go to the park and maybe they do something kind of naughty, which of course never happens, right? But they do something naughty or they do something naughty at grandma's house or something. I can internalize that as like, they are this extension of my mothering, right? This child is this extension of my mothering. And so when they're really young, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my fault that they're not sharing. And they kick sand in that kid's face, which literally happened 2 days ago, and all that kind of stuff. And we are talking on a much grander scale. I would imagine that, and I'm making an assumption here. Call me out if I'm wrong. Okay. Just call me out. That how do mothers not connect their children suffering at such an intense level with their efforts as a mother or who they are as a mother? Have you experienced that? What is the pathway like?
Yeah. Absolutely. I've experienced it. And absolutely it happens with parents because I think sometimes our identities are so wrapped up in our motherhood and in our kids. And, we invest so much in our kids emotionally and physically, and in every way we sacrifice and give to them. And so sometimes our identity is so wrapped up in them and their behaviors and their choices that when they kick sand in the face, we'll just say that, we think, I didn't teach them well enough. I'm not a good enough mom. We internalize it that somehow we aren't good enough because our kid kicked sand in the other kid's face.
Totally. Has any other listener been in that spot, whether a teenager or whether a 5-year-old, where it's like, right, I didn't do enough?
Well, and part of that is there is judgment that happens from other people that says, oh, well, if you were a better mom, you kind of hear some whispers, you've got to get control of your child, you've got to have more tough love, all of these things that we hear, so we internalize it even more. So I would say the path, because I've had to really focus on this, because otherwise it would just bring me in that deep dark pit, and I'd be living there.
And can I interrupt you? Because you're the perfect one to talk about this, because I would imagine you've instinctively felt that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did I contribute to this, or whatever. But I have been in the same room with you on multiple occasions. And I have felt of your inner confidence and your inner peace. It is undeniable. And I sit there and I'm like, how? It is this like mystic force that I'm like, how is she doing this? How is she smiling? How is she having normal conversations with people? Because I try to put myself there and I think I'd be in the pit, right? Just nonstop.
Well,
So
I've been in
tell
the
me
pit.
about this.
I've been in the pit. Believe me,
Yeah.
I have been there, and I have lived in that pit for a while. Because it's really hard to not be in the pit. That's where our mind seeks for the negative. Our mind naturally goes to that, well, this must be my fault, or, you internalize the judgments of others. And it's hard, especially when they're people close to you that, are giving you advice or judging or whatever. But I have been on a journey the last couple of years, and
Yes, you have.
one phrase that I hope your listeners would internalize is, your children's behavior does not define whether you are a good mom or not.
Wow.
You are not responsible for your children's behavior. We are responsible to love, to teach, to guide, to support, to be there for them, to show up, but we cannot control their behavior.
No matter what.
No matter what. Because you are a great mom, Sarah, and when that little boy kicked sand in the other little boy's face, you couldn't control that, right? We don't have that much control. I think sometimes we think we have more control than we do. Years ago, I was talking with a wonderful parenting mentor of mine. Her name's Georgia Anderson. You probably know who she is. She's a friend of mine. We grew up in the same area. She's my sister's good friend. And so I went to her house a few years ago, and I was in the pit. And we were talking about this specific child, and she just listened for a long time. And she said, Cheryl, I think that this child, he's going to take his own path. No matter what you do, he's going to forge his own way. And so you can try and stand and control him and be in his way, and he's going to bull you over, or you can walk alongside him and love him and guide him and teach him and have a relationship with him where you'll have way more influence than you would if you tried to control his behavior. And so from that time on, my thoughts about my influence in motherhood changed. My influence is in my relationships. My influence is in building those day after day and not in the control.
Oh, this is blowing my mind. This is blowing my mind that this was sort of the epiphany moment for you, where you decided, yes, oh my goodness, if I can sit in a space of teaching, loving, supporting, guiding, that is my inner peace. Mm-hmm. That is my day-to-day confidence, and recognizing that even our heavenly parents cannot control the behaviors of their children here on earth. But
and if
man,
they can't,
who are we?
Who are we to think that that's our job, is to control behavior?
They're the masters, at teaching and guiding. Keep going.
Instead of being behavior police, let's focus on our relationships. Wow. Let's focus on the teaching. Let's focus on understanding what's behind the behaviors. That's one of my biggest things, is looking beyond the behaviors. What's really going on? If you have a child who is really struggling, say that they are more aggressive, they are more defiant, they are all of these really challenging behaviors. Instead of focusing on the behavior, let's think about, I wonder what's happening to cause the behavior. Let's look at the root cause And when I can go there instead of focusing on the defiance and disrespect or aggression or anything like that, I can go to a place of empathy for my child.
So can you give us, you did a post about this on Instagram or you shared it or something that talked about, okay, this is the behavior you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
What's underneath it? What's underneath it? Can you give us a couple of examples of, like, my kids' grades are slipping,
Mm-hmm.
or they're all of a sudden saying no all the time? I don't know. What could be causing those kinds of behaviors, and how do we uncover that?
Okay. First of all, let's talk about kicking sand.
Oh,
Okay.
please. That's
We'll
my
use,
stage.
we'll use that as our example for a younger kid. Okay. Aggression in a child, kicking sand, biting, all of those things. Okay. Our goal isn't to stop the behavior. Our goal is to figure out what's driving the behavior. Because I think sometimes we think I just have to stop them from doing this, but then
Right.
we don't really get to the root of the issue. And so it's going to happen again and again. So let's think about a child who's kicking sand at another child. Maybe what you didn't see is the other child wasn't including them to play. Maybe what you didn't see is that your child is feeling a lack of confidence in that situation, playing with kids that he doesn't know. And so maybe actually the kicking of sand is a bid for connection, which sounds funny, but he's a 5-year-old kid with an undeveloped brain. And he's just standing there and going, okay, I'm going to see what, and it's not even conscious in his brain. It's
Yeah.
just, I don't know what to do here. So my body, and boys tend to be a little bit more aggressive, right? So I'm just going to kick this sand here. Did he intend to hurt the other child? Absolutely
No.
not.
No.
Absolutely not. So I think when we can assume the best of our kids and we can say, and you don't have to go this deep about kicking in sand, right? But if it's a continuous chronic aggression problem, you probably need to think, I wonder what's driving this. I mean, there's so many things it can be. It can be developmental delays. It can be, they're really struggling with confidence, or they're uncomfortable in social situations, or, we just have to look deeper. If we're having a chronic behavior issue, you have to look deeper.
Okay, and I've got to take this exact thought and push it further, because you are the queen in really, really empowering women to recognize that they can get answers here, that their soul, that the whatever form of power, priesthood, whatever you want to call it, that is within their soul, that there are ways for them to receive answers. Now, my husband's a physician. I have a huge respect for the medical world. You have, however, found things before the medical world that have aided your children's progress through mental health. So what is your message to women there that are like, I'm not a behavior specialist, like, I don't know
Right?
what's going on, I'm not a doctor. How does a mother function to fight like a mother for her
Yeah.
child?
Well, I would say you may not be a behavior specialist, you may not be the medical expert, etc., but you are the expert on your child. You know them better than anybody, and you are the expert on your child. And we have this big fleshy brain in our head that can learn and grow. And so sometimes you need to think, hey, maybe I need to do some research on this. I am a lifelong researcher and learner. And when one of my kids is struggling, I'm like, let's dive deep. Let's see what's going on. And the answers can come. I'll tell you right now, we are going through a possible medical issue with one of my kids. Okay. It hasn't been doctors who've pointed this out. It's been my mom's intuition, inspiration, priesthood, whatever you want to call it, that I've started to notice symptoms. And I'm like, that's interesting. That's interesting. There's been 3 or 4 things. And finally, when I talked to a medical professional about it, they were like, oh, yes, we need to look into that.
Oh my
Why don't you
gosh.
come in and we're going to do some testing and we're going to look at that. And I don't have a medical degree, except my husband tells me I'm the doctor mom of our house.
I'm sure.
But I just think if we really, but it takes confidence in ourselves that we can do this. And it also takes having still moments every single day. Because guess what? Those thoughts of mine about, oh, that's an interesting symptom to watch for. Oh, that's an interesting one. They didn't come during my still time. They came when I was watching behaviors, when, maybe things were chaotic, but I'd already had that still time in my day to tune in.
Wow. And I love this so much because the word that keeps coming to me over and over and over is advocate.
Mm-hmm.
Or to be an advocate,
Mm-hmm.
because you can sit there and sit with a family practice doctor or a therapist or something like that, and they are going to make their best practical
Right.
guess based upon looking at that person for a limited amount of time. So don't be afraid to advocate, right? My husband is the biggest proponent of that. When he asks questions before a surgery, please answer those honestly.
Yes.
You are in major trouble if you don't, right? Like there's a reason for that, but also bring anything to the table because you may not know what could be relevant in that scenario.
And I would say to moms, be confident going into a situation like that. And if
Yes.
you don't have a medical professional that's willing to listen to you, change doctors. I mean, I've changed doctors for that very reason. If I find a doctor is a little bit conceited and isn't willing to listen to mom, I've changed doctors. And my doctor right now is so phenomenal because he's like, we are a team. You're the expert on your child. I'm the medical professional. We work together and to find out answers. And so find somebody that listens, whether that's a doctor or a educator or a therapist, etc. Work as a team for the betterment of your child, so that you have that team effort. I mean, having a team behind you is powerful.
It's everything. It's the
Everything.
step in the victor's journey of the allies. You have to have
Yeah, well,
allies.
you have to have allies. And I mean, I'm not a medical professional, so I can't find, when I say you can find all the answers you need, I'm not saying I can treat my child medically, right? Or I'm not a therapist, so I don't have those tools, but I can find the resources that my kids need and realize that there's something going on here. We need to find some extra help.
Oh my goodness. So let me ask you, because we're in a room of entrepreneurs here on this podcast, what made you want to turn this into a movement, so to speak? This Fight Like a Mother movement. What was the spark that made that happen? And what's your bird's eye view of where this is going to go?
So the spark that made this happen was actually when I was probably in a pit with really feeling weighed down. I mean, this stuff with mental health is really heavy. I don't want to, I feel like I've sounded really positive right now, and I don't want anyone who's going through that journey to think that I'm minimizing it, because it is heavy, hard stuff. And there's a grieving process that happens when you're going through it, because your child is struggling and life looks very different than how you thought it would. And so I'm not trying to minimize this, because I am in those trenches as we speak. But I was searching desperately for resources and support, because, like we said, we don't talk about the uncomfortable, hard things. And we were going through some really, really difficult, uncomfortable, hard things. And I would start talking to somebody, kind of giving them a little bit at a time of what was going on with us to see if they were a safe person. And most people weren't. And I just was desperate for support and help. And I couldn't find it. And so I decided to create it. And so the podcast, I did not intend to create a movement. But when the idea for the podcast came and the podcast named itself, that name came and I'm like, oh, that's a little edgy for me. Fight like a mother. But it's who I become when I'm fighting for my kids.
Yes, and it's most mothers.
It's most mothers. And I tried to think of other names, and that was the name that it had to be. And so that persona of fight like a mother is who is driving this movement, because there's so many moms out there. There's so many heroic moms out there that are driving these really hard challenges with their families, and they don't feel like they have anybody who understands, or they're desperately searching for mental health resources and they can't find them in a way that speaks to them as not a medical or mental health professional.
Oh my gosh. Oh, Cheryl, I'm dying. I'm absolutely dying. I love just how it has grown and exploded. And I know you're expanding through communities and memberships and just some really, really incredible things on that platform. And one of the things that I feel like when people find out what kind of guests are coming on, I say, okay, what do you want to know? I have this little kind of pod of people that I pull for questions. And one of the questions that often comes up with any entrepreneur that I bring on here is like, what does the day to day look like? Like, what does your day look like as you're building this business? Or what does your day look like as you're balancing or whatever? And can I shift that a little bit to say, how does mental health, what does the day to day look like for a mother of of a family member or multiple members that have mental illness? What does your day look like?
Well, I have an anxiety disorder myself. So
Okay.
I tell people we swim in mental health soup at our house, because I have multiple children with different severities of mental health challenges. And I mean, when you have one family member with a mental illness, it affects everybody. So even if I didn't have other children that had mental health, I have it. And so day to day, I think it looks like we're doing our best. We make plans, but you also have to have the flexibility that sometimes those plans just aren't going to work out. Or you have to shift, or you have to cancel the plans with the friends, or even a family vacation or something like that. Sometimes the day to day looks like those expectations that you thought life would be like have to completely shift. And so I think that's one of the hardest parts with mental illness, is that we make plans on how we think life will go, and then often it gets derailed. And so I think that you have to be in a position, your own mental health has to come first, quite honestly. Because if I'm not in a good mental place myself, the whole train gets derailed instead of just one little wheel or car or something. And so I would say to moms, even moms who aren't facing these same challenges, you've got to work on you so that you can drive that train.
And is there a form of grief associated with that? And I know we probably all experience a form of grief of, oh, this didn't turn out how I thought it would turn out, or whatever. But in that stage of just like you said, family vacations and canceling get-togethers with friends, do you go through a stage of grief, and does resentment brew, or like, what does that conversation look like with God when you're kind of like, wait a minute, like, what is that like?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, my podcast episode today is about expectations versus reality.
Oh my
And that they're
goodness. So we're
absolutely,
recording this on June 2nd. So if you go to Fight Like a Mother, look
yes.
for the June 2nd episode. Okay, go.
So, and there absolutely is grief. And the hard thing is, I've talked to several families and moms who deal with this as well. It's this wave, and the waves sometimes are huge and take you under, and sometimes they're just little ripples. But, and it feels like it's kind of this constant grief of, oh, we can't do that. Oh, that's not.
Right.
And so it is really challenging to not get sucked under by the waves of grief. And I think the way that I have kind of dealt with that is, you just have to learn how to shift that perspective. You have to sit in it, because my son that attempted suicide is actually in a residential treatment facility right now. And it's his birthday tomorrow,
Oh,
and he's not
Cheryl.
with us. And that's hard. It's his 16th birthday.
Oh,
And
Cheryl.
he's not home with us. And for him, he's grieving that. And for us, we're grieving that.
Oh.
And I think you have to get to a point, and this has come through therapy for me. This has come through a lot of work on myself. It's constant work on myself so that I don't get sucked under, so that our family isn't completely derailed. And you just have to start to have this perspective shift that, yep, I can have my time to grieve this. Sometimes sometimes I stay in bed because I'm really struggling, but I don't want to live there. And so I'm going to get up and I'm going to do the things that feed my soul, and I'm going to focus on my kids, and we're going to focus on the joy. We're going to focus on what we're gaining through this, because we've lost a lot, but we're also gaining a lot of empathy, a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, a lot of reaching out to those who are marginalized. We're gaining a lot. And so I think sometimes you have to focus on that instead of everything that you're losing.
And have you found joy in the day to day? I
Yes,
know there are hard days, but is there joy in it?
absolutely. There's joy in it. Absolutely. You know, we had a visit with my son on Saturday with all of my kids, and we had a great day. We played together. We bonded. We laughed together, and there was great joy in that. And so I think you have to find the joy so that you're not sucked under. It's really hard sometimes, but I think it becomes a practice of seeking that joy. And sometimes it's not even joy. Sometimes you just have to be okay with being content that, okay, we're good today. We've had a good day. Nothing bad has happened. You know, it's maybe not even a joyful day, but we've had a good day. You know, I've connected with all of my kids. We're building our relationships. And I think when we focus on those relationships instead of how things should be, that's really important.
I love that. I love that how you've already solidified the priority, and the priority are those relationships. And if that means a Saturday get together and that's what those relationships are going to look like, fine. If it's not through a family vacation, that's okay. Like if the priority is the relationships, all of a sudden the environment in how the relationships are built matters less,
Yeah.
matters less. And
Yeah.
you're so focused on that.
My husband and I developed 6 parenting values, and I won't share them all with you, but one of them is the relationship is the most important. And that's a focus that we have to remind ourselves of sometimes, that is this going to enhance or damage the relationship? And so you have to make that choice. And sometimes what you think might damage the relationship actually might help it. Sometimes it's hard to make hard decisions for our kids.
Mm.
But in the end, it's going to help the relationship.
So can we talk about, just as our last segment here, about the impacts that this has on a marriage?
Absolutely.
And what does navigating a marriage look like when it comes to mental health?
Yes, we absolutely can. So my husband and I will be married 25 years in August.
Woo! Congratulations!
Thank you. Thank you. We have had our ups and downs throughout, as every marriage does, right? And several years ago, my husband has a cousin whose son has schizophrenia. And she is several years ahead of us in their journey. And one of the things she said to me that has stuck with me for years is, this journey is so challenging for marriages. She said, every treatment facility that my son has been in, there's hardly any parents that are still married, because it is
that's horrifying.
Really challenging. It's hard to know how to parent these kids. And so you get in this conflicts with how to parent and things like that. And I can absolutely see how it could just break apart. And so I think it's this intentional choice, day after day, month after month, year after year, sometimes minute by minute, that I'm choosing you, that we can have these hard times. We can have conflict. We can have arguments over how to parent these kids, but in the end, we choose each other. And you have to make time for each other, because otherwise there's no time for each other unless you carve it out and make it. My husband and I just went on a 6-day trip together a couple of weeks ago. And it was awesome because both of us were like, we remember why we love each other, why we like to be together. Sometimes in those day-to-day moments, you're like, oh, they're driving me crazy. The way they do this, or the way they chew their food, or the way they, put on their socks or whatever, it's driving you crazy. But if you can get away from the daily stresses and play together and have fun and just have some of that pressure lifted, we were like, oh, yeah, I remember you.
Incredible. Oh, I love that there is humor and joy and fun within that marriage. That do you let the mental illness just take over the entire thing, or do you allow it to have its place, and allow your marriage to continue to have its place as well? I just respect you on such a level for the efforts there.
I think you really have to differentiate. You have to differentiate the mental illness from other aspects of the family, or else it can take over.
It's the everyday moment by moment.
Yeah.
Oh, Cheryl, this has just been a dream come true for me to have you here on the podcast. I'm so grateful for you, and especially for your courage to talk about something that is just critically impacting every family on earth today. Thank you for your courage, for your wisdom, for your hopeful message as well, that we can do this, and there are families that are happy and doing their best, and marriages that are staying together and committing to one another. It brings my heart so much joy to see the incredible work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Sarah. This has been a dream come true to chat with you as well. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, listeners, if you are feeling that burn to become a better advocate, which I hope is all of us, myself included, I am recommitting to following more closely Cheryl on Instagram, as well as her incredible podcast, Fight Like a Mother, to just allow yourself to enter the world of mental health so that you can better advocate for those people who will cross your path. Maybe it's even yourself in the future, to be able to connect us with resources and communities and all those things, so that you can become an advocate just like Cheryl has. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next podcast. Hey, you. Thanks for listening to the Victories Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Sarah Grace Live. You can also find us on YouTube under the same name. If what you listened to today really, really resonated with you, would you rate and review it for us, please? That is the biggest, most important thing that you could do to show your support for the message that we're sharing here. So glad to have you as part of the Victories Podcast community. The Victories Podcast is written, produced by me, Sarah Grace, edited by Rachel Johnston, and spread across social media by Mikkel Davis and Brittany Jones. Super grateful for the Sarah Grace Live team.